Luca didn't just spend money, he spent it with flair. He took her to a private box at a hockey game in Vancouver one night and, the next, to a tiny, classic jazz club in a forgotten corner of London. He was generous, showering her with small, thoughtful gifts, a cashmere scarf on a cold night, a rare first edition of a book she'd mentioned in passing. He was building a beautiful cage around her, and she was walking right in. As their relationship deepened, Luca's protective side shone through. If she mentioned a problem with her old car, a new one would magically appear in her parking spot a week later. If she was stuck working late, a professional driver would be waiting to take her home. It was overwhelming, but it made her feel safe in a world that often felt harsh. However, the darkness of his world couldn't stay hidden forever. Elena's best friend, Rosa, saw the writing on the wall. Rosa was a straight-talking, Jamaican-Canadian woman who worked as a nurse and had known Elena since college. Rosa wasn't afraid to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. "Lena, seriously, what are you doing?" Rosa demanded one evening, sitting on Elena's couch. "He's gorgeous, yes. But he's DeLuca. You save people, he runs things that hurt people. It's oil and water, girl." Elena sighed, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. "He's not what people say, Rosa. When he's with me, he's just Luca. Kind. He asks about my day. He listens. He listens to see what he can use, honey. He's a professional secret keeper," Rosa warned, her voice dropping. "You're an honest, good person. This man's business is blood and cement. You need to stay away before you're in too deep." Elena knew Rosa was right. She tried to resist. She really did. But every time she prepared to end it, Luca would show up with that devastating smile, whisking her away, talking about art or astronomy, never about the criminal dealings that funded his lifestyle. He kept his business hidden behind layers of lawyers, shell companies, and the silence of the city. When she asked about his job, he'd just smile and say, "I manage assets, Kara. Very large, very complicated assets." One night, Luca took Elena to a stunning villa on the coast, perhaps somewhere tucked away in the Hamptons or the quiet Irish countryside, surrounded by manicured lawns and absolute privacy. She was in a silk dress he'd bought her, sipping champagne. It was a lifestyle that felt like a movie. "This is incredible, Luca," she whispered, looking out at the glittering water. "You deserve incredible," he murmured, pulling her close. "You brought me back to life, Elena. I want to give you a life full of light." He introduced her to his small circle, men who were impeccably dressed, polite, and completely humorless. The air around them was thick with unspoken rules and hidden power. She saw the flickers of cold authority in Luca's eyes when he spoke to them, a look that instantly reminded her of the fear Rosa felt. He was a force of nature, and she was caught in his orbit. Even as a small voice screamed danger, the sheer magnetism of Luca, the beautiful world he'd opened up, and the genuine warmth she felt when he held her tight, won out. She was falling, and she didn't want him to catch her, she wanted to fall with him. She chose love over common sense. As they watched the sun rise over the water, Luca held her face in his hands. "You are my anchor, Elena. Don't ever forget that," he said, his voice raw with emotion. It was a moment of absolute vulnerability, a tiny tear in the thick armor of the Mafia boss. And in that intimate, dangerous moment, she truly believed that their forbidden love was strong enough to conquer the darkness. She was terrified, yes, but she was finally happy. The private world Luca had built for Elena became their bubble, a place where the darkness of his work couldn't quite touch them. He was a master of compartmentalization, and she was desperately in love with the man he was only in her presence. Their romance deepened not just through lavish dates, but through quiet nights in. They'd sit by the fire in one of his beautiful, secluded homes, maybe a stylish loft overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge, or a stately house tucked away in the countryside near Bristol. It was during these moments that Luca finally started to crack his emotional armor, and Elena got a look at the man beneath the legend. He wasn't just a boss, he was a survivor. Luca revealed a childhood that was heartbreakingly scarred. He told her stories, his voice low and haunted, about his father. The senior DeLuca was a brutal, cold man who had ruled his family and his crime empire with an iron fist. Luca hadn't chosen the mafia life, he'd been forced into it, groomed since he was a child to take over a brutal legacy. "He taught me that tenderness was weakness," Luca confessed one night, looking into the fire, not at Elena. He made me do things, terrible things, just to prove I was worthy. Elena reached out, covering his hand with hers. She didn't offer pity, just solid, quiet acceptance. That was her gift. She saw the little boy who had been hurt, trapped inside the body of the most feared man in the city. She learned that his temper, the flashes of cold anger she occasionally saw, were not just a tool of his trade. They were a defense mechanism, a scar left by his cruel father. She saw that the tenderness he showed her was profoundly real because it was something he'd had to fight for, something he'd kept hidden from the world. But the secrets were always a heavy blanket over their happiness. Sometimes a late-night phone call would pull him away, his words turning instantly sharp and clinical. He would simply vanish for a day or two, and when he returned, he'd be tired, his eyes holding a look of distant violence. Elena hated those secrets. They were the constant reminder that the man she loved was also a man who caused pain. Then, the world tilted for Elena. She started feeling exhausted, nauseous. It wasn't the stress of his world, it was something else, something life-changing and undeniable. She was pregnant. The moment she saw the confirmation on the test, a wave of pure, conflicting emotion washed over her. Joy, of course, a tiny piece of the man she loved, a symbol of their real connection. But overwhelming fear quickly followed. She knew Luca loved her, but how would he react to a child? A child who would have his name, his blood, and who would be a target in his dangerous world. A child he might see as another responsibility forced on him by his legacy. For weeks, Elena kept the news a secret, tucking it away inside the secrecy of their bubble. She wore slightly looser clothes, avoided the champagne he occasionally offered, and constantly checked her reflection, looking for signs of the change she couldn't hide forever. She felt intensely alone, knowing the one person she needed to share this joy with was also the source of her deepest anxiety. One evening, while standing on a balcony watching the lights of the city sparkle, Luca pulled her into a hug from behind. "You're quiet tonight, amore," he murmured, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What is it?" Elena hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at him, the powerful man who protected her, the scarred man who trusted her. She saw his future, his legacy, and now, theirs. This wasn't just a secret anymore, it was a life. She took a deep breath, turning in his arms. She knew telling him might blow up their world, but keeping it inside was suffocating her. This was the most terrifying thing she had ever done, even more so than saving his life. "Luca," she said, her voice shaking slightly, but holding firm. "I need to tell you something. We're going to have a baby." In the silence that followed, Luca's face went completely blank, his powerful hands slowly dropping from her shoulders. The fear in Elena's chest was intense, but beneath it was a fierce hope that the real, tender man she knew would finally choose love over fear, and choose her and their child over the darkness that defined him. She looked at him, waiting for the decision that would either bless their future or break her heart completely. The stage was set, and she waited for him to step up, or walk away. The silence in that beautiful, expensive room after Elena dropped the news felt heavier than stone. Luca's handsome face, usually so expressive in private, was suddenly a cold, unreadable mask. Elena waited, every beat of her heart a painful tick, hoping for the tenderness she knew existed deep inside him. Then, the door opened, and the spell was brutally broken. Two of Luca's senior men, his underbosses, big, serious men named Vinny and Marco, walked in. They stopped short, sensing the thick tension in the air. For the first time since she'd met him, Luca looked at Elena not with love, but with pure, Arctic indifference. "I need to speak with you," he said to her, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of the Mafia boss, not how amore. "It's important, Luca," she pleaded, gesturing towards her stomach. "This is us." Luca didn't flinch. He glanced at Vinny and Marco, then looked back at Elena, his dark eyes like chips of ice. "There is no us, Elena," he stated, his voice loud enough for his men to hear, clear and completely final. "And there is certainly no this." He took a step back, putting distance between them. "Did you think I was serious? Did you honestly believe the head of the De Luca family would jeopardize his position for a fling with a nurse?" The words were like sharp pieces of glass hitting Elena's heart. She felt the blood drain from her face, the humiliation burning hotter than any fever. She looked from Luca's cruel, cold face to the faces of the underbosses, who were looking away in uncomfortable silence. "A fling," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I just told you I'm carrying your child." Luca gave a short, hard laugh, the most painful sound she had ever heard him make. "You are clearly mistaken. I am many things, but a fool who creates easy liabilities? No. If you have any situation, it is not mine. Handle it." That was it. The man who had confessed his deepest fears to her, who had vowed to protect her, was denying their entire life together, denying the child growing inside her, all for the benefit of two stone-faced subordinates. It was a complete annihilation of her hope, her love, and her dignity. Elena didn't argue, didn't cry, and didn't scream. She simply straightened her spine. The calm strength that had saved his life now served to save her own soul. She looked at him one last time, meeting the coldness in his eyes with her own heartbroken resolve, and then she turned and walked away. She walked out of the apartment, out of that life, without another word, without a backward glance. The silence she left behind was louder than any fight. What Elena didn't know was the horrifying truth behind his performance. Just hours before, Luca had received information from his network, a threat relayed by his enemies, the rival organization that had ordered the hospital shooting. They knew about Elena. "Show weakness, De Luca. Show us that pretty little nurse is important to you, and we'll send her home in a box. We will end your weakness before it grows." He knew he couldn't hide her, and he couldn't run with her. His only option, the only way to ensure her survival and the survival of their unborn child, was to make her hate him. He had to perform the ultimate act of cruelty to save her life. He had to deny their love in front of witnesses so that his enemies would believe she was truly disposable. As soon as the door clicked shut and Elena was gone, the cold mask shattered. Luca stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a table, his body shaking with silent, devastating grief. Vinny, his most loyal man, took a step forward. "Boss, she's gone." That was convincing. Luca closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. "It had to be, Vinny. Now listen to me. I want her gone from the city. Disappear her. Give her enough money to start a new life, far away, somewhere they will never look. Use the Canadian connection. Give her a new name, a new identity. Make sure she never, ever has to see this world again." Vinny nodded, understanding the silent pain in his boss's command. Luca looked toward the door, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He had just traded his own happiness for her safety. He had broken her heart into a million pieces so that she could live, and so their baby could live. It was the most brutal, loving choice a Mafia boss could ever make. After that devastating scene, Elena felt like a ghost in her own life. The heartbreak was a physical weight, crushing the joy out of everything. But she had a job to do. She had a life to protect, the little life growing inside her. Just 2 days after the encounter, a mysterious but polite man, not Vinny or Marco, but a stranger, met her on a quiet street corner. He handed her a sealed envelope containing a new passport, a large bank book filled with money, and a plane ticket. The ticket was for a flight to a small, unassuming town on the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia, Canada, a place where the wind was cold and the people minded their own business. The name on the new passport was Eliza Thorne. She took the package and left. She didn't look back at the hospital, at her old apartment, or at the life she'd shared with Luca. That life was a lie, and the pain of it was the fuel that pushed her forward. The small coastal town became her sanctuary. It was the kind of place where the biggest drama was usually the weather. Elena, now Eliza, was just a quiet, pale woman starting over. She kept her head down, renting a small cottage near the harbor. The money Luca had sent was more than enough, but her pride wouldn't let her live on it. She found work right away, cleaning rooms at a local bed and breakfast, simple, honest work that kept her on her feet and her mind busy. 9 months after she fled, she gave birth to her son, Matteo. He was the single most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He had her quiet eyes and sweet nature, but with Luca's jet-black hair and intense, serious gaze. He was a piece of the darkness, yes, but he was also the purest light in her world. Matteo was the reason she got up every morning. He was the reason she learned to cook fish, the reason she planted a tiny garden, and the reason she finally learned to laugh again, the kind of genuine, unburdened laugh she hadn't managed since that fateful night on the balcony. Life settled into a steady, hard-working rhythm. She had no friends, only kind neighbors who respected her privacy. She spent her days working and her evenings reading to Matteo, telling him fantastical stories about heroes and adventures. As Matteo grew older, his questions grew harder. Around age 5, he looked up at her one night, his Luca eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy," he asked, pulling at the corner of her shirt. "Where is my dad?" This was the lie Elena had rehearsed 1,000 times, the one she needed to tell to protect him. She sat him down, holding him close, smelling the sweet scent of his shampoo. "Your father," she said softly, choosing her words carefully. "He was a good man, Matty. A very brave man. But he went away a long time ago. Before you were born. He was sick, and he couldn't stay." She never used the word dead. She just said he went away. But the implication was always clear. Luca De Luca was a ghost, a beautiful memory buried beneath a necessary lie. She told Matteo that his father had been a traveling businessman who loved her very much. This kept the truth of his dangerous legacy out of her son's innocent world. Years rolled by. Matteo was in primary school, fiercely protective of his quiet mother. Elena was no longer Elena, she was Eliza, a pillar of the small community, known for her kind heart and her endless hours of hard work. She truly believed Luca was gone forever, locked away in her past like a terrible dream. She had built a fortress of normalcy around her son. She had chosen safety over wealth, peace over passion, and she had won. One crisp, late afternoon, Elena stood looking out at the foggy harbor. Matteo was playing nearby, his laughter carried on the wind. She watched him, realizing that the cold-hearted choice Luca had made that night, the choice that had broken her, had, ironically, led her to this quiet, peaceful happiness. She had survived. Her son was safe. She had hope. 7 years. 7 years Elena had been Eliza Thorne, living a life as steady and predictable as the tide rolling into the Nova Scotia harbor. Her life was simple, beautiful, and most importantly, safe. She had just finished a long shift at the small, local community clinic where she worked as a medical assistant. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that seemed too bright for a Tuesday. But some doors, once shut, are never truly locked. That evening, the clinic doors burst open not with the usual elderly patient seeking a flu shot, but with chaos. 2 men rushed in, dragging a third. This third man was bleeding badly from his side, clutching a makeshift bandage. The moment Elena looked up, the air left her lungs. Her world, the quiet, safe world she had carefully constructed, shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was Luca. 7 years had done things to him. He was still the imposing force of nature she remembered, but the change was deep. His face was leaner, etched with lines of perpetual exhaustion and something colder, quieter, almost haunted. The charm she remembered was gone, replaced by a devastating mask of guilt and pain. He saw her, too. For a split second, the coldness in his eyes flickered, replaced by a naked shock of recognition and intense relief, a look that instantly reminded her of the vulnerable man she had saved years ago. "Eliza, you need to help him," one of the men barked, pulling Luca onto a bed. Elena didn't respond to the man. She only responded to the blood and the injury. Her training, her core self, took over. She moved with practiced efficiency, stripping away the makeshift bandage, her hands working expertly over the wound near his ribs. "This needs stitches." "It's deep," she said, her voice flat and professional, completely devoid of emotion. She was Elena the medical assistant now, not the heartbroken lover. "I need the trauma kit. Now." Luca lay there, his eyes tracking her every movement. He watched her hands, the strong, familiar hands that had once saved his life, now carefully cleaning the wound his life had inflicted upon her. His guilt was a raw, visible thing, tightening the muscles around his jaw. As Elena was preparing the needle for the stitches, a door at the back of the clinic opened, and a small, quiet voice echoed into the room. "Mom? Did you forget my snack?" "Matteo." He walked in, rubbing his eyes, carrying his dinosaur lunchbox. He stopped short, confused by the 3 strange, imposing men and the one bleeding on the bed. Elena froze, the sterile needle hanging in her hand. Luca's head snapped towards the sound. He looked at the boy. Matteo was 7 years old, slender and sweet, with Elena's gentle demeanor. But everything else, the dark, thick hair, the powerful shape of the brow, the intense, almost world-weary gaze, was an exact, perfect mirror of Luca himself. It was Luca's face, softened and miniaturized. Luca stared, stunned, the pain of his physical wound instantly forgotten. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was his son. The son he had violently denied, the vulnerability he had sacrificed everything to protect. Matteo, sensing the heavy silence, looked at the man on the bed with curiosity. "Mom, who is he?" Elena swallowed hard, her professional facade crumbling. She looked at Luca, who was still speechless, his eyes now shimmering with a depth of emotion she hadn't seen since that night years ago. He was seeing the proof of the love he had thrown away. "Matteo, go wait for me in the office, please," she managed, her voice tight. "This is a patient." Matteo, sensing his mother's stress, obeyed instantly. As the boy disappeared, Luca finally spoke, his voice a low, broken whisper. "My God, Elena. He's my son, Mr. De Luca." She cut him off, jabbing the needle into his skin to start the stitches. It was a purely clinical gesture, but the slight sharpness of the movement held years of resentment. "He has no father." Luca gritted his teeth, not from the physical pain, but the emotional truth of her words. He had to face the reality. He wasn't just facing the woman he loved, he was facing the life he had destroyed. His return was not a triumph, it was a reckoning. As she finished the final stitch and dressed the wound, Elena stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done her job. Luca was safe, for now. But she knew, looking at the guilt and sheer desperation in his eyes, that he hadn't just returned to get medical treatment. He had returned to claim the life he had sacrificed, and this time, she was no longer the girl who fell easily. She was a mother, and her safety was no longer her own to risk. The sterile light of the small clinic room seemed to highlight the raw tension between them. Elena had finished wrapping Luca's side, her professional task completed. She moved to leave, needing to put distance between herself and the shock of his return, but Luca reached out, his hand catching her wrist. The touch was firm, desperate, not demanding. "Don't go, Elena. Please. 5 minutes," he pleaded, his voice stripped bare of its usual cold authority. She paused, her back rigid. "My name is Eliza. And I have nothing to say to you, Mr. De Luca. Your 5 minutes were used up 7 years ago when you called our life a fling." He let go of her wrist, running a tired hand over his face. "I know what I said. And those words, they haunt me every damn night. But I need you to understand. That was the only way to save you. And to save him." He glanced toward the closed office door where Matteo was waiting. Luca took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers, eyes now full of something close to terror. "There was a traitor, Elena. Inside my inner circle. He had sworn to the rivals that if I showed a single weakness, a single connection to the outside, clean world, he would use it to destroy me. And you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense rumble. "They were watching us. They knew you were pregnant. The threat was explicit. Deny the child, or we send her back to you in pieces. They wanted to see the denial. They needed me to break your heart to prove you were disposable." Elena stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to the impossible confession. She wanted to slap him. She wanted to scream at him. Instead, she laughed, a short, brittle sound that held no humor. "You expect me to believe that?" she challenged, crossing her arms over her chest. "That the great Mafia boss, Luca De Luca, couldn't just send me away privately? You couldn't tell me the truth in a private moment? You had to humiliate me, crush me, in front of your thugs. They had to witness it. They had to report back to the enemy that I was cold, that I prioritized the family over a woman," he insisted, his voice cracking with sincerity. "If I had shown you any tenderness, they would have known it was a lie, and you would be dead right now. I gave you a lie to give you a life, Elena. I sent you away with everything you needed to vanish. I had to let you hate me so you could be safe." She shook her head, tears finally stinging her eyes. "No. You're twisting it. You're a monster, Luca. And you're just trying to rewrite history to get a look at the son you denied." Yet, as she looked into his eyes, something shifted. Luca wasn't the arrogant, controlled man she remembered from that night 7 years ago. His powerful shoulders were slumped, his jaw was slack with exhaustion, and his eyes held a profound, naked fear. The fear of a man who had lived for years with an impossible secret and a devastating guilt. This wasn't the look of a manipulator, it was the look of a tortured soul. I have spent every day since then paying for that lie, Elena, he whispered. I cleaned house. The traitor is gone. The danger is lessened. But I could never look for you, never contact you, because I didn't dare risk them finding you again. He gestured to his wound. This is not an accident. I came here, to this quiet place, because I was desperate. I knew you might work at a place like this. I was hoping, praying, I could see you one last time, just to know you were alive and safe. Elena didn't rush to forgiveness. The pain of 7 years of single motherhood, the pain of the public rejection, was too deep. But as she watched him, the hardened layers of her conviction began to peel away. The fear in his eyes was too real, the story too brutal, and the sudden appearance of the mysterious money and the quick escape now made a horrifying kind of sense. She didn't believe him completely, not yet, but she saw the sincerity. She saw the sacrifice. And for the first time since he walked back into her life, she saw the tormented man she had once loved, desperate for a sliver of redemption. I don't know if I believe you, Luca, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. But I need you to know one thing. You broke my heart to save my life, and that scar is deeper than any wound you have right now. You may be safe from your enemies, but you are not safe from the consequences of that choice. She knew the fight wasn't over. Her future, and Matteo's, depended on knowing the absolute truth. But for the first time in 7 years, she felt a glimmer of hope that the darkness hadn't won completely, and that the love they shared, however broken, might still have a fighting chance. The moment Elena allowed herself to even consider Luca's confession, the quiet certainty of her life began to dissolve. She had started a dangerous process, digging through 7 years of pain to find a single, buried truth. But that truth, even partially revealed, brought immediate consequences. It began subtly, like a chill in the coastal air that wasn't caused by the sea. First, it was the feeling of being watched. When she walked home from the clinic, she felt eyes on her back. When she picked Matteo up from school, she sometimes caught sight of an unfamiliar car idling a street away, too dark, too clean for this sleepy town. Then came the escalating fear. One afternoon, she returned to her small cottage to find the back door ajar. Nothing valuable was missing, but her photos were disturbed, and the baby blanket she had kept from Matteo's birth was tossed on the floor. It wasn't a random break-in, it was a warning. They knew exactly what she cherished. The final, terrifying straw came 2 days later. Matteo was playing down by the docks, watching the fishing boats come in. When he returned, he was pale, clutching his arm. "Mom," he whispered, looking up at her with fear in his big, dark eyes. "A man. He asked me my name. He asked if my dad was coming back soon." Elena's blood ran cold. The denial, the distance, the 7 years of sacrifice, it had all been for nothing. Luca's darkness had found her, and it was threatening her son. She knew exactly where to go. She drove straight to the secluded, high-end cabin where Luca was recovering from his wound, guarded by Vinny. She burst in, the quiet rage of a protective mother radiating off her. Luca was sitting by the window, reading, but he rose instantly, sensing the shift in her energy. "They're here, Luca," she stated, her voice shaking with forced control. "They've been in my house. They followed Matteo. Your enemies have tracked you, and they found my son. You brought your hell with you." Luca didn't try to deny it. His face hardened, slipping back into the cold mask of the boss, but his eyes were filled with self-loathing. He had gambled his life to see her, and now that gamble was endangering everything. "I know," he said, his voice grim. "They found the trail I left when I was desperate. They're testing the boundaries, seeing if you still matter." "And what are you going to do?" Elena demanded, pacing the room. "Run again? Lie again? You can't just wish this away, Luca." He walked toward her, stopping just inches away, his presence overwhelming the small room. "I won't run. And I won't lie," he vowed, his gaze intense. "I take responsibility, Elena. Every bit of it. I told you I came here to see you were safe. Now that I know you aren't, I will use every resource I have left to shield you." He lowered his voice. "I am the target, not him. The closer I am, the more visible I am, the less they will focus on a woman and a child. I need to stay. I need to draw them to me. Stay, she scoffed. And bring a full-scale war to this town? No. We will leave. We will disappear again. And where will you go that they can't find you? Luca countered, his logic brutal and undeniable. They know your new name, they know your son's face. Running will only make you vulnerable on the road. He reached out slowly and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I broke your heart to save you once. Now I will risk my life to protect you. I am staying, Elena. Not as your lover, not as your husband, but as your shield. I will not let them touch him. Elena looked at him, seeing the terrifying truth in his proposal. A part of her wanted to push him away forever, but the larger, practical part knew that alone, she was defenseless against this kind of threat. With Luca, however dangerous, came protection, resources, and knowledge of the enemy. She stepped back, the decision wrenching through her. Fine. You stay, she conceded, her voice barely a whisper. But you do not approach Matteo. You are a patient, nothing more. If you hurt him, if you bring that darkness near him, I will expose you to the police myself. Do you understand? Luca nodded slowly, a small, pained look of gratitude flashing in his eyes. Understood. The shield stays. For the first time in years, Elena felt hope fighting alongside sheer terror. Her life was officially chaos, but she wasn't fighting alone anymore. She walked out, leaving the Mafia boss in charge of their safety. Her quiet, peaceful existence was over, but perhaps, just perhaps, the presence of the man who loved her would be strong enough to ensure their survival. With Luca established as their self-appointed shield, the tension in the small coastal town became a living, breathing thing. Elena was terrified, but she was also fascinated by the way Luca moved through her world. He didn't strut, he observed. He didn't command the locals, he paid them for their silence and goodwill. She watched him from a distance, seeing him interact with Vinny, no longer with the cold authority of a boss, but with the quiet, stressed urgency of a general trying to pull his troops out of a lost war. She began to see the deeper truth in his eyes. He wasn't just a powerful man, he was a man haunted by loss, weighed down by years of deadly secrets. One night, after making sure Matteo was sound asleep, Elena drove to Luca's secluded cabin. The air was thick with the scent of pine and sea salt. She bypassed Vinny, who gave her a knowing nod, and found Luca staring out at the dark, vast ocean. You're barely sleeping, she observed, her voice softer than usual. Luca didn't turn around. Sleep is hard to come by when you know the people you love are in danger because of you, he admitted, his voice rough. He finally turned, and the look of sheer, debilitating exhaustion on his face convinced her more than any confession. He wasn't maintaining an empire, he was trying to bury it. I'm not trying to run things anymore, Elena, he confessed, stepping closer. I'm trying to end them. I've been dismantling the infrastructure, selling off assets, cutting ties, retiring men. Piece by piece. I didn't want this life. I didn't want my father's legacy. I'm trying to kill it for good. He spoke about the difficulty, the danger of letting go. An empire doesn't just retire, it fights back. The very act of trying to stop being a mafia boss was the most dangerous thing he had ever done. Then, he went deeper. He talked about the reason he became so ruthlessly effective, so cold, so powerful. It wasn't just his father's cruelty, it was a devastating trauma that fueled him. When I was 17, my mother was murdered, he said, the words heavy and careful. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated by the Moetti family, the same people who are threatening you now. My father wouldn't retaliate because he was weak and greedy. I swore that day I would never be weak, and I would never let anyone hurt someone I loved again. Elena felt a shock of deep, painful pity. She had always viewed Luca's power as something he chose. Now she understood it as a cage he built for himself out of grief and vengeance. The tenderness she had seen in him wasn't a lie, it was a painful reminder of the tenderness he lost with his mother. She was so kind, Luca whispered, his eyes distant. She used to read me stories and she never, ever looked scared of my father. I took over the family just to destroy the Moettis, to avenge her. But the vengeance never came. It just turned me into the monster my father always wanted. Elena didn't know how to respond to such a raw admission. She moved closer and, without thinking, placed a hand gently on his cheek. It was a gesture of deep, non-romantic compassion. You are not a monster, Luca, she said softly. You are a heartbroken boy who grew up and made some very wrong choices. Luca closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. I broke your heart to save your life, he repeated, his voice thick with guilt. But I made a promise to my mother, and I made a promise to you. I will end this darkness. And I will not let them hurt your son. In that moment, she stopped seeing the dreaded Mafia boss. She saw a damaged man trying desperately to claw his way out of a grave he hadn't chosen. He wasn't her enemy, he was the primary victim of the darkness that had now consumed their lives. His confession was a fragile bridge, rebuilt with pain and honesty, connecting them back to the spark they had shared 7 years ago. The air in the quiet coastal town was tightening, every shadow feeling heavy with surveillance. Luca, operating from his cabin, was trying to draw the enemy in, but the silence from the rival Moetti family was unsettling. They were too calm, too sure of themselves. Luca knew they had an edge, a connection he couldn't find. Elena, meanwhile, was focused on one thing, getting Matteo through this. She was driving home one day when she saw Rosa's familiar car parked a block from her cottage. Rosa, her best friend, the one person who had warned her away from Luca, had flown in from the city a few days ago, claiming she was there to support her. Elena pulled over, her heart lifting slightly, seeking that familiar comfort. But as she approached, she saw Rosa wasn't alone. She was talking to a heavy-set, impeccably dressed man Elena recognized instantly from the trauma base 7 years ago, Marco, one of Luca's former underbosses, and a known betrayer who had gone to the rival Moetti family. Elena stopped dead, hiding behind a large maple tree. The blood drained from her face as she watched the exchange. Rosa was speaking urgently, and then, she handed Marco an envelope. Marco nodded, slid a thick roll of bills into Rosa's hand, and then drove away. When Rosa turned back toward the cottage, her face was strained, but her usual sharp demeanor was intact. She looked like a spy who had just finished a dangerous mission. The realization hit Elena like a physical punch. It wasn't the Mafia boss who had tracked her, it was her best friend who had sold her out. Later that evening, in a secluded spot near the lighthouse, Elena confronted Rosa. "Who was that man, Rosa?" Elena asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Rosa blinked, feigning innocence. "What man, Lena? I just went to the corner store." "Don't lie to me," Elena cut in, her eyes hard. "That was Marco. The man who works for the Moettis. The man who is trying to kill Luca and harm my son. You gave him something. What was in the envelope, Rosa?" Rosa's face crumbled. The practiced calm evaporated, replaced by shame and fear. "Lena, I can explain. It's not what you think. They forced me." "No," Elena said, shaking her head slowly. You chose. You chose money over my son's safety. Tell me the truth, Rosa. All of it." Choking back tears, Rosa confessed the secret that had stained her friendship for years. She had been dealing with the Moettis for money, a secret she kept hidden even from Elena. 7 years ago, when Luca was injured, Rosa had overheard enough hospital gossip to put the pieces together. She was the one who confirmed to the Moettis that Elena was Luca's weakness. "They just wanted information," Rosa sobbed. "They wanted to confirm where you went. They said it wouldn't hurt anyone. I needed the money, Lena. I was in debt." But the worst revelation was yet to come. Rosa fumbled inside her jacket and pulled out a worn, sealed envelope. "After you left, Luca sent me a letter," Rosa confessed, her voice thick with self-hatred. "He wrote you a letter the very next day. A real, honest letter, saying he loved you, saying he had to deny you to save you, and begging you to wait for the funds and follow his instructions. He was too afraid to send it through his men, so he gave it to me, thinking I was your closest friend. I never gave it to you." Elena took the letter, her hands trembling. It was Luca's familiar, elegant script. She tore it open and read the raw, desperate words. "Elena, my love, forgive my cruelty. I did this for your life. They were watching. Trust the money, take Matty, and vanish. I will hunt them down, and one day, I will find you and beg for the forgiveness I don't deserve. Yours, Luca." The world seemed to spin. 7 years of devastating heartbreak, of believing she was disposable, of carrying the painful lie for her son, had been built on a foundation of betrayal. The man she hated had been trying to reach her with the truth, and the woman she trusted had kept her in the dark. The realization was crushing, but strangely, it was also liberating. Luca hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't lied about his love. He had risked everything, including his fragile ego, to send her the truth. The burden of bitterness lifted, replaced by a fierce, protective love for the tormented man who had made the ultimate sacrifice. She didn't forgive Rosa. She simply looked at her former friend with quiet disgust and walked away, clutching Luca's letter. She knew what she had to do. She had to take the letter to Luca and tell him they were fighting this together, not just for their son, but for the profound, beautiful love that had survived betrayal and distance. She had hope. She had justice. And now, armed with the truth, she was ready to stand by the only man who had truly put her safety first. The quiet coastal town had officially become a hunting ground. Elena had barely absorbed the shattering truth of Rosa's betrayal and Luca's letter when the ultimate disaster struck. It was late afternoon. Elena was at the clinic, and Matteo was waiting for her in the small office, reading a book. When she went to collect him, the room was empty. No note. No mess. Just the book, lying open on the chair. She raced home, heart pounding against her ribs like a terrified bird. The cottage was the same. No sign of a struggle. But then she saw it, tucked under the front door, a small, white card, heavy stock, with a simple, chilling message written in elegant, black ink. The weakness is gone. Come and retrieve it, De Luca. Matteo was gone. The Moetti family had taken him. Elena collapsed onto the floor, the truth of the situation crushing her. The terror was overwhelming, but underneath it, a raw, screaming wave of guilt washed over her. This was my fault. If she hadn't been so consumed by bitterness, if she had only shared the truth with Luca sooner, if she had only trusted him, Matteo would have been safe. She had kept the denial alive for 7 years, and now her son was paying the price. She drove to Luca's cabin in a blind panic, screeching to a halt outside. She didn't have to say a word. The look on her face, the crumpled card in her hand, told Luca everything. Luca's reaction wasn't panic, it was a devastating, terrifying stillness. The kind of stillness you see right before a storm hits. He took the card, crushed it in his hand, and closed his eyes, a single muscle twitching in his jaw. Matteo, he whispered, the name of Val. They have him, Luca. Elena choked out, tears finally streaming down her face. They have my baby. Luca looked at her, his eyes ablaze with a mixture of fear for his son and fierce resolve. They will regret this until their last breath, Elena. I promise you. He pulled out his phone, his mind already calculating the move. He was a general in crisis, and the crisis was his own blood. The Moettis won't hurt him immediately, Luca explained, speaking quickly. His bait. They want me to walk into an ambush, or they want the surrender of what's left of my organization. We have time, but not much. They began planning immediately, a desperate fusion of their two opposite worlds. Luca brought his underworld connections, the ability to find out where the Moettis held their targets. Elena brought her unique skills, her knowledge of medicine, her calm under pressure, and her ability to notice small, crucial details. Luca paced the room. The best option is an abandoned warehouse outside the city. They like places they can control. Vinny is mobilizing a team, but we need an edge. If they think you're coming in with muscle, they'll kill him first, Elena countered, rubbing her temples. We need stealth. We need a way to neutralize the guards without making noise. And if we do get him out, we need to be prepared for the worst. She looked straight at Luca. I'm coming with you. I know how to stabilize a wound, I know how to administer drugs, and I know exactly what my son looks like when he's scared. Luca hesitated for a moment, seeing the determination in her eyes. It's too dangerous, Elena. He is my son. And your fear 7 years ago didn't save him. My courage will, she insisted. You handle the guards. I handle Matteo. You get us in, I get him out. He knew she was right. Her presence made the mission faster, safer for Matteo. He gave a sharp nod. Luca spent the next few hours calling in favors, arranging transport, and securing information. Elena, meanwhile, entered the small clinic supply room, gathering gauze, antiseptic, adrenaline, and a few small, but potent, sedatives she knew how to use. She also packed a comfort blanket and Matteo's favorite superhero figurine. As the sun disappeared, casting long, fearful shadows over the town, they stood together at the door. Luca was armed with a quiet resolve. Elena was armed with a medical bag and a mother's ferocious love. Luca turned to her, his gaze intense. If anything happens to me, you take Matteo, you run, and you never look back. Nothing is going to happen to you, Elena said, reaching out to touch his scarred face, a gesture of full, restored trust. We are going to bring our son home. Together. The guilt was still heavy, but it was now transmuted into pure, focused resolve. The Mafia boss and the medical assistant, an unlikely army of two, headed out into the night, united by love and a desperate need for justice. The warehouse was a skeletal monument to industrial decay, hidden deep in a forgotten port area. Inside, the air was cold, damp, and smelled of stale seawater and fear. Luca and Elena moved like ghosts, Vinny and two other trusted men covering the perimeter. Elena, clutching her medical bag, stayed close to Luca, her mind focused only on rescue. They found the central office space where the trap was set. Matteo was there, huddled in a corner, tear-stained but unharmed. Standing over him was a man whose face Luca knew intimately, though the identity still struck Elena with cold horror. Giovanni Moetti, the head of the rival family. But Giovanni wasn't just a rival. As soon as Luca stepped into the light, his face drawn and determined, Giovanni's smirk hardened into a sneer of pure hatred. Look who finally shows up. Giovanni spat, his voice echoing in the vast space. The mighty Luca de Luca. And you brought the whore and the bastard. Such weakness. Luca ignored the insults, his eyes fixed on his son. Let the boy go, Giovanni. This is between us. It's always been between us, little brother, Giovanni hissed, his words cutting through the tension. Elena gasped. Half-brother. The rivalry wasn't just business, it was blood. Giovanni was the son of Luca's cruel father and another woman, a hidden piece of the legacy Luca had been desperate to escape. You should have kept running, Luca, Giovanni taunted, pulling a long, wicked knife from his belt. You were supposed to be the perfect, cold heir. But you let a woman save you. You let a child make you weak. Luca drew his own weapon, the cold steel reflecting the warehouse lights. I am ending this now, Giovanni. You and the rot that father left behind. A brutal, vicious fight erupted. It wasn't a clean gunfight, it was a close, desperate struggle between two men fueled by 7 years of rivalry and a lifetime of shared trauma. Luca fought with the disciplined strength of a man who had mastered violence, but Giovanni fought with the unhinged rage of a man who felt perpetually second best. As the fight intensified, Giovanni suddenly lunged past Luca, aiming the knife not for Luca, but for Matteo, who was screaming in terror. If I can't have the family, neither can he. Giovanni roared. Luca moved instantly, throwing himself between his half-brother and his son. The knife plunged deep, sinking into Luca's side, just above the wound Elena had stitched. Luca roared, a sound of pure pain, but he used the force of the impact to send Giovanni sprawling against a pillar. As Giovanni staggered, Vinny and the others stormed the room, securing the area. Giovanni was neutralized, his reign of terror finally over. Elena rushed to the two figures on the ground. Matteo, thankfully, was fine, clutching his father's jacket. But Luca was bleeding, the dark stain spreading rapidly across his side. Luca! Elena cried, dropping her bag and ripping open his jacket. The wound was deep, far worse than the last one. As she pressed hard against the injury, fighting to keep him conscious, Luca coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. His eyes found hers, shining with pain, but also with an immense, final relief. My father, he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. Not the traitor, Elena. My father ordered the denial. He found out about you and threatened to kill you both if I claimed the child. He wanted me cold, untouchable. I couldn't claim you because of him. He confessed the ultimate truth, the final layer of betrayal. His father, the man whose legacy he had inherited, had orchestrated the public humiliation 7 years ago, forcing Luca to choose between his son's life and his dignity. The truth settled over Elena, a truth so devastatingly cruel, it made perfect, sixth sense. Luca had been trapped from the very start. Elena ignored the blood, ignoring the pain of the moment, and held his gaze. I believe you, Luca. I know. I love you. She worked quickly, her medical training overriding the panic. She stabilized the wound, giving him a shot of adrenaline she'd packed. She knew he needed a hospital, but first, they needed to escape the warehouse. Matteo, sobbing but safe, pressed his face against his father's chest. "Dad, don't leave," he cried. Luca reached up a bloody hand and gently stroked his son's cheek. "I won't, Matty. I won't ever leave you again." Elena, gripping his hand tightly, saw the justice in the moment. The dark legacy was broken, the enemy was beaten, and the truth was finally revealed. Luca had been gravely wounded, but he was alive, and their son was safe. She looked at the man she loved, knowing that the greatest battle, the fight for his life, was only just beginning, but they would face it together, rooted in love and honesty. The frantic journey from the warehouse to a safe house was a blur of adrenaline and fear. Vinny, ever loyal, had secured a quiet, private location far from any hospital or surveillance, where Elena could work without interference. Under a single, harsh lamp, Elena meticulously tended to the man who had broken her heart and then nearly died saving her son. Luca was unconscious, pale, his breathing shallow. She had used every skill in her medical assistant arsenal, cleaning the deep knife wound, stitching the torn flesh, and monitoring his vital signs with the fierce, focused attention of a lioness. As the morning light began to filter through the windows, Luca finally stirred. He opened his eyes slowly, his gaze heavy and unfocused. The first thing he saw was Elena, her face streaked with exhaustion and dried tears, watching over him. The second thing he saw was Matteo, asleep on a nearby couch, clutching his superhero figurine. Luca's lips moved slightly. "Matty is safe. He is safe. Because of you," Elena whispered, leaning closer. He tried to sit up, wincing instantly from the pain. Elena pushed him gently back down. "Don't move. You lost a lot of blood. You need rest," she instructed, her voice soft but firm. Luca reached out a trembling hand, finding hers. He held it tightly, his eyes filled with a desperate, naked plea. He wasn't the Mafia boss commanding respect, he was just Luca, a broken man lying on a bed, facing the consequences of a lifetime of pain. "Elena, I know words aren't enough," he rasped, his voice raw. "But I need you to know. I am so sorry. For the humiliation. For the years you suffered alone. For the lie. I was weak when I should have been honest, and I was cruel when I should have been brave." He squeezed her hand. "I don't ask for my life back, or for the life we lost. I just beg for your forgiveness. Not for me, but so I can look at Matty without carrying the guilt of having denied him." Elena looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time without the lens of bitterness. She saw the heavy toll of his father's cruelty, the devastating choice he'd been forced to make, and the immense sacrifice he'd paid with his own blood. She saw the truth. They had both been victims of fear and circumstance. She had been trapped by her heartbreak, and he had been trapped by his father's violence. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were cleansing tears, washing away the residual pain of the past 7 years. "Luca," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I read your letter. Rosa's confession, and your father's final order. I know the full truth now." She reached up and gently touched his cheek, her thumb wiping away a tear that had escaped his eye. "You don't need to beg," she whispered. "I forgive you. I forgive you because you were forced to make an impossible choice, and in the end, you chose to save us. You risked everything to tell me the truth and protect our son. The man who denied us is gone. The man who saved us is here." A look of immense relief washed over Luca's face. He closed his eyes, his breathing evening out as if a tremendous weight had finally been lifted from his chest. "I love you, Elena," he murmured. "I never stopped." "I know," she replied, a genuine, soft smile finally breaking through her tears. "I love you too, Luca." Elena settled into a chair by his side, holding his hand, feeling the steady, shallow rhythm of his pulse. The danger was past, the enemies were dealt with, and the biggest obstacle, the devastating secret, was gone. Justice wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about the simple, profound act of forgiveness, letting go of the pain so that love could finally win. She was right where she needed to be, by the side of the man she loved, ready to face their peaceful future together, no more lies between them. Years flowed like the tide on their quiet Canadian coast, washing away the last traces of the fear and chaos they had survived. The Mafia boss and the medical assistant had won their battle, not with bullets, but with forgiveness and the fierce love for their son. Luca recovered slowly, tended back to health by Elena, whose care was now infused with complete, unwavering devotion. Once he was strong, they made a final break. The remains of Luca's empire were quietly dismantled, the money channeled into legal trusts, and the name De Luca was systematically retired from the underworld forever. Luca became simply Luke Thorne, a quiet, successful man in finance who worked from home. Their new life was built on simplicity and light. They settled into a beautiful, sturdy house near the sea, where the biggest noise was the sound of waves and children playing. They had peace, and that was more valuable than all the wealth in the world. Matteo grew up strong, kind, and completely unaware of the full darkness his parents had survived. He knew his dad had a very serious job that sometimes made him quiet, and he knew his mom was the best at fixing anything, from a scraped knee to a broken lamp. He knew he was loved fiercely, completely, and without reservation. Luca didn't just spend time with Matteo, he invested in him, teaching him to fish, to fix things, and most importantly, how to treat others with respect, the opposite of his own father's cruel lessons. Elena flourished in her freedom. The permanent tension she'd carried for years melted away, revealing the vibrant, joyful woman she was meant to be. She continued to work at the small clinic, but now she was the heart of her community, known for her easy smile and calm competence. There were no more secrets, no more lies. Their conversations were easy, filled with the mundane joys of running a home, planning a trip, or discussing Matteo's latest school project. Their love wasn't a whirlwind anymore, it was a deep, solid foundation, unbreakable and true. On a warm summer evening, years after the reckoning, Luca, now Luke, sat on the porch swing, watching his family. Matteo, now a lanky teenager with his father's dark hair and his mother's laugh, was in the sprawling garden, playfully chasing a golden retriever they had adopted. Elena, kneeling nearby, was laughing, her hands covered in soil as she tended to a flourishing rose bush. She looked up, caught Luca's eye, and gave him a smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that was Luca's daily dose of sunshine. He took a deep breath, the clean, salty air filling his lungs, realizing the absolute miracle of this moment. This simple, perfect, domestic scene was the life he had truly been fighting for all along. It was the antithesis of the cold, violent world he had escaped. As he watched his wife and son, a single, powerful memory flashed through his mind. The cold room, the cruel words, the public denial that had saved their lives. The pain of that memory was gone, replaced by profound gratitude. He reached out and touched the small, silver locket Elena wore, a gift he'd given her after their wedding, a symbol of their renewed faith. Looking at the two people who were his entire universe, Luca whispered, the words barely audible against the gentle evening breeze, "I'd deny the world before I'd ever deny you again." It was a final, private vow from the man who had traded an empire for peace, and who had finally found true love and redemption in the quiet life he had built, one honest day at a time. They were safe, they were whole, and they were finally, beautifully, free. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoy it. Let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification button so you won't miss any of our heartwarming and loving stories. His blood was still warm on my hands when I realized I never stopped loving him. Years ago, this same man, Luca De Luca, looked me in the eyes and denied the child growing inside me. In that moment, I thought my heart would never beat again. Now, here he was, broken and bleeding in my arms, whispering my name like a prayer, "Elena, please, forgive me." I should have walked away. I should have let him fade into the darkness he built. But love doesn't listen to logic. This is not a story about fairy tales. It's about the kind of love that destroys you, and still makes you hope. Before we start the story, leave a comment with the city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Let's get started. This story starts not with a dramatic bang, but with a woman named Elena and the quiet rhythm of her life. Elena wasn't a doctor or a big-shot administrator, she was a medical assistant at a large, often overwhelming, city hospital, the kind of hospital that never sleeps. It was a Monday afternoon in a busy district, maybe like the financial heart of Toronto or downtown Manchester. Elena herself was the kind of person you'd trust instantly. She was practical, with sharp, kind eyes and hair she usually just tied back in a quick ponytail. She carried a calm strength that came from dealing with people at their most vulnerable. She was wearing her slightly too big navy scrubs, feeling that familiar afternoon drag, when suddenly the usual chaotic noise of the city outside turned into something far worse, a series of sharp, loud cracks, followed by shouting. Elena didn't freeze. While others were ducking for cover near the reception desk, her training, her instinct, kicked in. The sound had come from right outside the emergency entrance. She bolted through the doors. Lying slumped by a black SUV, bleeding heavily onto the pavement, was a man. He was huge, even folded over like that, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. This was Luca De Luca. Luca De Luca. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the type. He had the sharp, intense look of a man who was always in control, a man who commanded fear and respect just by existing. His dark hair was slicked back, and his face, even pale from shock, was chiseled and imposing. He was the feared head of a major family, a crime boss, but right now, he was just a man losing too much blood. His bodyguards were frantically assessing the damage, looking terrified. "Get back!" Elena yelled, her voice shockingly steady. She didn't care who he was. She just saw a trauma case. "I need gauze and a stretcher now." She dropped to her knees. She didn't hesitate to tear open his expensive jacket to assess the wound, a nasty, deep graze, but thankfully not a direct hit to a major artery, though it looked awful. She used the pressure of her hands, pushing hard against the wound. Luca groaned, his eyes flying open and locking onto hers. They were eyes used to surveying a room for threats, but now they were glazed over with pain and surprise. "Don't move," she ordered, her face inches from his. "You're going to be okay. We're going inside." He didn't flinch from the pain, but something shifted in his gaze as he looked at this young woman, her hands covered in his blood, her brow furrowed with pure, practical focus. He was used to people fainting, running, or groveling. He wasn't used to this calm, honest strength. She wasn't asking him questions, she was simply taking charge of his life. Now, as the orderlies finally arrived with the stretcher, and they quickly wheeled Luca inside, a tiny, almost invisible spark ignited. For Luca, it was the fascination of someone who simply didn't fear his shadow, and for Elena, it was a strange pull toward the absolute mystery and raw power that radiated off him, even when he was completely vulnerable. As the doctors swarmed him in the trauma bay, Elena stood back, her heart finally starting to pound. She was shaking, the adrenaline wearing off. A few minutes later, one of Luca's sharply dressed men approached her. "The boss wants to see the person who saved him," the man said, his voice flat. Elena hesitated. She knew who he was now, the whispers in the hall confirming the truth. She knew stepping back in that room meant stepping into a world she didn't belong in. But as she thought about his intense, dark eyes, and the moment he'd silently trusted her with his life, she knew she had to go. She cleaned herself up and walked into his private room. He was propped up, looking much stronger, but his eyes were still fixed on her. "Elena," he said, the name sounding foreign and powerful on his tongue. "Thank you." "It's my job, Mr. De Luca," she replied simply. He smiled, a slow, dangerous gesture that reached his eyes. No. That was fate. In that moment, they both felt it, a connection forged in chaos, tying their opposite worlds together forever. It felt dangerous, yes, but it also felt like destiny, like something truly beautiful might bloom from the dust of a terrifying night. Elena knew she should have stayed away. After she saved Luca De Luca, the whispers about him weren't just background noise, they were loud and clear. Yet, how do you ignore a man who sends an entire bouquet of white lilies, the most stunning flowers she'd ever seen, to her tiny apartment every single day? This is how the dance began. Luca was careful. He didn't show up at the hospital. Instead, he would call her work number, asking mundane questions about his health, his voice a low, gravelly invitation. He would arrange to meet her in upscale, quiet restaurants in parts of the city she'd only seen on postcards. He was charming, of course, the kind of charming that could disarm a whole room. He had a way of looking at Elena like she was the only person who truly mattered in the world, and for a woman used to being invisible in a busy hospital, that feeling was intoxicating.